great to be here. I was here for fire, and then Bina and the festival invited us for water, which was a wonderful experience. And I thought, I will never have an experience like this again. And then at Midnight's Children, I have to say it's even better. So thank you, the audience of Kerala, thank you, the festival, and thank you, Bina. Thank you. Now we can start.
Okay. Now both Salman Rushdie and you can sort of be looked as historians of a certain kind, artist historians, if I can call that. And Salman Rushdie, Midnight's Children was written 20 years ago, and a lot has changed in those 20 years ago, in that 20 years. And that could perhaps explain the sort of different nature of the screenplay, if you compare it to that wicked sense of writing history in Midnight's Children, and that rueful nature of the screenplay of the film. And both of you, being historians of a certain kind, like historians, have a very love-hate relationship with the nation, a sort of relationship the nation also shares with you, love-hate relationship. They have invested a lot of national pride in both of you. There is certainly a sort of pride in the kind of works that you've done, but also a certain need to shut you up at certain moments. Now, do you consider this position of being able to zoom out and look at things from the point of view of an artist historian, do you consider that position as a position of privilege or a position that is quite painful or disappointing at times?
The position of having the I think the ability, or even finding the circumstances, I'll speak for myself, I cannot speak for Salman, is that it's like looking at a painting and you being outside the frame. And this isn't something that I even expected. When I first moved to Canada from India, I was 24 years old, and I'd grown up in India, and went to university there in Delhi, and got married in India. And when I thought I'd move to Canada, I thought it would be for a couple of years, and before you know it, you have children, and then you have investments that are emotional in another country. So my relationship with India became one of a person from the diaspora as they look at their homeland. I didn't feel that I was removed from my homeland. I didn't feel that I was not in touch with my homeland the way I wanted it to be, but it was a different relationship. So I don't think that it was a matter of a relationship of privilege or a status that gave me privilege. I think it was just what I found myself. And you develop a sense of relationship according to that status. As for the love-hate relationship, I mean, I've always felt that as an NRI, that I always had, the longest time, I looked at India with rose-colored glasses. I mean, there was nothing, the sun rose and set with India. And it was basically, I don't think it was very realistic. It was the relationship of nostalgia. Everything, music, the weather, the monsoons, everything became, and I realized that I was looking at it as a foreigner, because nostalgia is a standpoint that belongs to outside. And when I realized that, it became good.
Slowly, with Midnight's Children, you can slowly have sort of charted away from the outside to the inside.
And I think, yes, you're absolutely right. I feel I have charted away from the outside into an acceptance that I'm actually a part of the diaspora, and the way I look at it is different. And that comes with a bit of pain also. It's a double-edged sword. It's sort of realizing, and I guess I'm growing old too, that you realize that my relationship with India is as strong as it could be, but it's different. And I have to accept the fact that I am an NRI, non-resident Indian. And somebody told me the other day that NRI now stands for non-required Indians, so you don't know.
Now, to talk about the music of the film, the music used in the film sort of changed the film from being and it's sort of adaptation of Salman Rushdie's novel to a Deepa Mehta film, and with its homages to the S.D. Burman Sahib Ludhianvi Pyasa or Jagjit Singh with the Nitin Shawnee's soundtrack. So can you talk about the part music plays in not just Midnight Cinema but your other films? How do you integrate music during the process of filmmaking? Do you think about the music while you're filming it, or is it a part of integration after post-production?
I think that my relationship with music and my films is integral. And for me, it's as important a component of a film as is casting, sound design, camera work, production design. And I in fact start thinking of the music while the screenplay is being written. Because I think that in fact songs and music in the tradition of our theatrical and traditional background can really push the narrative forward. So if a certain song, whether it's a piece of music or the use of say Rag Bhairavi or any certain, what am I trying to convey with that? And I think that if it doesn't push the narrative forward, there's no reason for it to be there. And for me, music has always been an imperative form of that can move the story along.
When did you decide to make Midnight Children into a film? Was it a political decision? Was it a sort of that this book is just wonderful, I think I need to make it into a film?
My relationship with Midnight Children and film has been, it's taken a circuitous route, I think. I read the book in 1982 when it first came out, and I was in Delhi University at that time. And I just fell in love with the book. I didn't make films then, so I didn't even think of it as a possible film. I just loved the book. I loved the story of the book. It touched me in a way that few books have. And I'm not just talking about Salman's way with words and his creating a language that became the language of a new generation, and turning English upside down in its head and giving it back to Indians. It's just superb. But the story, the conceit of a young man search for an identity. Because for different people, Midnight's Children has, they can take away from it something different. But for me, it is Salim's search for a home, for an identity, for a family. And paralleling that, it's the search of a country for its place in the world. So a young man in the foreground and the canvas, which is a historical canvas in the background, seemed so eminently, I think, touching and accessible that it moved me greatly. And years later, about 4 years ago, when I asked Salman who owned the rights to Midnight's Children, he said, I do. And I said, how would you feel about me making a film about Midnight's Children? And he looked at me and he said, okay, done. So I said, really? And he said, yes, go ahead and do it. And I don't know to this day, Aisha, why I even said that. Why I didn't say Shalimar the Clown or The Moor's Last Sigh, which is so much more accessible. So I must have been a sucker for punishment. But I just did, and I think that somewhere in my psyche, I must have really remembered that it is a search for a home. And as a person who moved from India to Canada and is constantly searching, it's become much better now for an identity and a new family. It made imminent sense to do it now.
Now, having said that, it is a huge challenge to adapt such a work into a film. And was the visual medium, was the cinematic medium able to accommodate that how difficult was it to adapt in that sense? What the kind of difficulty the visual medium had in accommodating the narrative of the
It's not just Midnight's Children. I mean, every screenplay, the challenge for a director after screenplay is done, whether it's based on a book, whether it's book-based, it's an original screenplay, whether it's a quasi-adaptation, is always difficult. Finally, whether I've written the script myself, and you put on your director's hat, and you have to start visualizing and thinking in images of what you're going to be translating from the written page to the image. In that way, Midnight's Children was no more or no less. And one of the things that when we decided to do it and we made the commitment to do the film based on Midnight's Children, I was I was talking to my producer David Hamilton and to Salman, and I said, Salman, one of the things that I really am going to tell you that I'm going to do right now is that I'm going to really try my best to forget that this is an iconic book, because otherwise I will be paralyzed by fear. And so I decided literally, very consciously, to take my fear or my sense of awe, or be beholden to it in any way, beholden to the book and put it in the backseat. And I said I will visit it and re-edit it. And Salman was totally in agreement with that. And this I got, if any of you have seen Coppola's DVD about how he approached The Godfather. It's something that I learned from him. Of course, Godfather is not nearly as iconic as Midnight's Children, or neither is it One the Booker of the Bookers, but it's still the adaptation. How do you look at an adaptation? And you really have to take the source material at some point and not be overwhelmed by it. So that was the first thing.
So did you always think did you think of approaching the film through other genres, say maybe a slightly more surreal genre, visual language, or comedy or observers sort of setup? Did you think of anything of that sort, or was it always?
You think, once we'd done the script and Salman Rushdie wrote the screenplay, there are things that flitted through your brain, and I said, oh my God, we could go the route of anything, the way film is even shot these days. It's very fast cutting, the scenes are broken down in totally different ways, and it could be surreal, and we could have shot it on my cell phone. You can do all of that, and I decided that I really didn't. I wanted to approach the book and the screenplay hereafter with a certain amount of, to give it a feeling that I was approaching a classic. So in that sense, I mean, it's interesting you said not think of it as being a comedy. You could do any of that, but you didn't say approach it as a classical cinema, because that's the approach which is, you don't see much of that these days. I wanted to go back to to the great sort of humanitarian filmmakers. So I was definitely thinking of Tokyo Story, for example. I was definitely thinking